Now, do you see how subtle that is? Because you start asking, how do you put all this stuff together? But after you get over the first shock, you see that it can't be all that difficult, because we speak this way even of human love, don't we? I mean, I could say with a straight face, I love riding my motorcycle, I love woodwork, and I love my wife. But if I put all three together in the same sentence too often, my wife will not be pleased. Because they are really quite different contexts, aren't they? And they really have different weight. Or again, I can say, I believe, so help me God, I love my children unconditionally. I have a daughter in California who works with disadvantaged kids. If instead she became a hooker on the streets of L.A., I think I'd love her anyway. She's my daughter. I love her unconditionally. I have a son who's a Marine. And if instead he started selling heroin on the streets of New York, I think I'd love him anyway. He's my son. I love him unconditionally. Yet in another context, when they were just kids, learning to drive, if I said to one of them, make sure you're home by midnight, if they weren't, they faced the wrath of Dad. In that sense, my love was quite conditional, thank you. It was conditional on obeying me and getting the flipping car home. In other words, there are different contexts where it's the same kids, the same dad, but the language it changes just a wee bit. Did you see? I don't think my unconditional love changed for them. There's a matrix in which that's true. Another matrix where there are agreements and family responsibilities, or in biblical terms, covenantal obligations, where God's wrath might well break out. There are contexts in which God's wrath is as wide as can be imagined. Some contexts in which it's rightly said to be amoral, and others where it's selective. So, people sometimes come along with cliches like, God loves everybody just the same. True or not true? And the answer is, yes. Because some of the passages that the Bible deploys language of love in really cast God's love as amoral. He sends his Son and his reign out of love upon the just and upon the unjust. He loves people just the same. But there are other contexts, like the fifth of the ones I mentioned, where it's dependent upon obedience. And still others where it's grounded in God's own sovereign selection. Do you see? You can't do anything to make God love you anymore. True or false? It depends on the passage, do you see? Because the Bible can use God's love language in different contexts in slightly different ways. In one sense, you want to affirm that absolutely. Because at the end of the day, you can't earn God's love. My kids don't earn my love by bringing the car back before midnight. I love them anyway. And yet, at the same time, there are different contexts in which God's love is spoken of. Be careful you do not make silly mistakes as you read the biblical texts by taking one verse out of its context, universalizing it, and take no care to see the wonderful diversity of ways in which the Bible speaks of God's love.